Hi, I'm Wayne Willis, and this is the second part of a little video series I'm doing on some existential thought as it relates to education. And I, Part one went through 4 or 5 main points I wanted to explore. The last one had to do with the fact that a lot of things in our world we consider progress that make life more efficient don't necessarily make life better. And so we end up treating people like objects, hurting them here and there, manipulating and so forth. And so I want to continue that by making the sixth point that this individual alienation, a sense of loss of identity, a sense of who you are, is perpetuated by the labels and categories we use to describe people. That we tend to give some people labels and then treat them as though the label is the whole person. And that's the problem. It's not that the label itself is inaccurate necessarily. It's just we act as though that label we've given somebody is the whole of who they are, and then we treat them as less than whole people. And there are a lot of negative labels that we might give people, say that they're bums or jerks or something like that. But even positive labels can be inhibiting if we think that person is nothing more than the label. You'll see this with a lot of teachers have run into this. The kids think that the teacher's whole identity is teacher. That's it. And so they run into the teacher at the grocery store and they're shocked to see them at the grocery store because they don't think of them as people who cook or moms who take care of kids or dads who take care of kids or whatever. They just think, well, your whole self is that teacher. And I used to be in the ministry, and there were folks who tended to assume that if you are a minister, then you are a certain kind of person and nothing else, as though that describes your whole identity. And so, from the existential viewpoint, it would be good to remember that the labels are not accurate. Even the best labels, only describe one little piece of who a person is. Think about it. If I said, how many labels do we have to have for you to know somebody? If we pick a student in the class and say, what labels do we have for this person? Well, this person is a teacher. This person is a graduate student. This person is a woman. This person is a wife. This person is a mother. This person is a daughter. This person is a Republican or a Democrat or Kentuckian or religious or secular or if you made a list of 10 different labels that describe them, would you really know them? And I think the answer to that is no. You come up with 10 more labels. Down to you to know them? I think the existential answer is always we are more than our labels. And as long as we allow labels to define people, then we are ultimately thinking about them as less than human beings and ultimately mistreating them because we are all more than that. Now, we use lots and lots of labels in public schools, especially relative to special education. Some kids are special ed kids or short bus kids, as some of the kids say, or they are learning disabled or behavior disordered. Maybe they have a reading disability. You have students who we apply all these labels. And while the labels may be there to help us understand specific needs that they have, the problem is those labels become a part of the kid's identity. And once we have given people a label, we also tend to treat them as objects rather than people. As soon as you start thinking of a person as the label, then you're really objectifying them, turning them into objects, not treating them as whole human beings. And so we have to be, from the existential viewpoint, we have to be very careful about our labels. Now, we know that some of those special ed labels do have some negative connotations that really work against the kids sometimes. But from the existential viewpoint, perhaps the most destructive label that we use in school is the label student. Not necessarily a negative label, but the problem is we act as though that label defines the whole child, as though he is nothing more, she is nothing more than student. And once we have reduced them from human beings to students, then we feel more comfortable treating them as objects, not as whole human beings. We're much more comfortable manipulating them, see, because the only thing that matters is their role as student, and therefore we want them to be good students, and so we will say, you got to do this, you got to do that, you got to do this, without regard to who they may be as whole people. Now think about it. And well, sometimes we acknowledge this. We'll say, well, Johnny's having a hard time because mom and dad are going through a divorce. And so we acknowledge that there's more to Johnny than just student. But it's great to have a phone go off in the middle of your video. In an adult world, we don't necessarily go around controlling people the way we do in public schools. We give our friends room to be different. We make suggestions. We offer concerns, but we don't dictate to them what they do because we respect them as human beings. We don't have the right to do that to them. But once we give a kid the label student, we tend to assume that gives us the right to take over their lives and control them, as though student is all there is to them. Forget the fact that they are somebody's best friend, that they are the beloved of their mama or their granddaddy, or that they are, the central feature of the life of their family. And so when our own daughter went off to kindergarten, my wife wrote a lengthy letter to her teacher just telling her about her kid, and she tends to behave this way, and she has these talents, and she struggles with these kinds of things, and really the whole point of the letter was to remind the teacher that this is not just a kindergarten student, this is somebody's child, and they love this child, and they want the very best for this child, and it's hard to do that as a teacher when they're herding them through 30 at a time, and so existentialists invite us to be careful about those things. Another theme has to do with objectivity of knowledge. We sometimes make a big deal about things, objective tests and objective knowledge and the facts, and sometimes shy away from talking about values or anything that's subjective. And existential writers tend to be pretty critical of objective knowledge. They think it's sort of it's a myth. Nothing's really objective. And that may come out of existential poets or playwrights or painters, but it's actually ties in very much to recent quantum science that says that things are not as objective as we tend to assume, that everything is influenced by the observer, everything has an angle. And so the existentialists tend not to put as much emphasis on objectivity and facts. Rather, they say that the knowledge that is presumed to be objective tends to be trivial. The stuff that really matters is that which we internalize. It's subjective. It becomes a part of who we are, makes our lives different. There are scientists who tend to take an existential viewpoint, but generally existentialists are not as prone to science because of their skepticism about objectivity. They do tend to be poets and artists and writers, creative writers, and so forth. They see metaphor as important. It's easier to understand, to connect, more powerful to connect with realities of life through metaphor than through some kind of literal propositional language. The knowledge that is recognized as subjective knowledge is the most valuable because it consists of internalized, integrated, self-initiated meanings. It's not merely cognitive, but also affective. And so again, if you think about your classroom in school, do we put a big emphasis on the facts or upon kids' emotional connections to learning and reality and so forth? The knowledge we attain subjectively may not lend itself to logical propositional statement. Basically already said that. Maybe expressed better through metaphors. And so we have people like Walker Percy, I consider a wonderful writer with an existential bent, and he mostly wrote novels. You may know of existentialism through somebody like Jean-Paul Sartre, Franz Kafka, and a lot of these folks are operating at the level of metaphor, at the level of the subjective, because that's what matters most. I think about this in terms of some language I've heard in church. I have a background in religion and theology and spent a lot of time in church in my life. But I remember hearing preachers talk about the idea was that some people miss heaven by 18 inches, the difference between your head and your heart. The idea is that having information in your head is not sufficient to change your life. It has to be internalized, it has to be in your heart. And that's sort of an existential idea. not necessarily the religious part of it, but the idea that what matters is not what you memorize and forget, but what you internalize, what becomes a part of who you are. So little Johnny at the end of the day or at the end of the class, the real question is not how he scored on the test, but did he learn to love learning? Did he develop a passion for thinking critically? Um, what really has become a part of who he is? Because most of the stuff you memorize is going to be forgotten. It's going to be gone. Father Guido Sarducci, the comedian from Saturday Night Live, if any of you have ever heard of him or seen those clips, he has a little routine he does called the 5-Minute University, in which he argues that he's going to create a university that will give a college degree after only 5 minutes. And the way that we'll do that, legitimately do that, is by only teaching those things the average college graduate would remember, say, 5 years after graduation. So the idea is we memorize a whole lot and we forget it. And he says, it's all very funny. I encourage you to watch it. But he says, only thing anybody ever remembers about an undergraduate econ class is supply and demand. So why not just teach supply and demand and go on to something else? The only thing anybody remembers from an undergraduate Spanish class is hola, ¿qué tal? ¿Cómo estás? Bien, tú. And so, why not just do that and go on? The existentialists are not interested so much in the things that kids memorize that they will forget. They're interested in the things they will internalize that will become a part of their lives ever after. They're ultimately more interested in living a life than gathering information. We should be helping kids learn to live a life. Henrietta Mears once wrote that much time is spent teaching young people how to make a living, yet few know how to make a life. And Existential Thought says education preoccupied with test scores and sports and all those kinds of things trivializes its real task, because the real goal is to learn how to live a life meaningfully, joyfully, in the face of suffering and pain. And that's not easily measurable. I think I'll stop right there for now, and perhaps there'll be another video later, but that gives you the overall picture of some prominent themes in existential thought that relate to education. I mentioned Martin Buber and Camus and Kafka. Soren Kierkegaard was considered a major thinker in modern existential thought. I mentioned Walker Percy, the novelist. Also, the English novelist Graham Greene, as one of my favorite writers, who also tends to write in ways that are associated with existentialism. In terms of specific writers writing about education, two of my favorites are, two of my favorite books. Well, the favorite writer is Maxine Greene. She wrote a book called Teacher as Stranger, and that theme is an important part of existential thought for her. And actually, I think I will explore that a little bit in a third video. She also talks about wide awakeness, which I will also explore in the third video. So keep those names in mind, and I'll be sharing more later. Hope this was helpful to some of you. Thanks.